good morning. We'll go ahead and get started. My name is Julie Forrell. I'm the Field Marketing Manager for Corteva Agriscience Crop Protection, and I cover Nebraska and Iowa. Thanks for joining us today for the Enlist Best Practices webinar. Whether you're new to the technology or you're a repeat customer, we hope that you can capture a few new insights from today's training that will hopefully help you achieve weed control success in your Enlist crops. I'll be your moderator today, but I'm joined by two very knowledgeable colleagues and Enlist experts, Todd and Jeff. So Todd, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yep, I'm Todd Spivey. I'm a market development specialist out of what we call the Southeast North. So I'm in North and South Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee, and Kentucky.
Thanks, Todd. Jeff?
And my name is Jeff Moon. I'm the market development specialist for the crop protection team that works in the states of Minnesota and Wisconsin.
Thanks. Glad to have both of you here today. All right, before we start, we do have our legalese. When in doubt, and if you ever have any questions about a product, always go to the product label. This is your source of truth. But you can always, consult your local crop protection representative as well. So today's agenda, we'll go through here really quick, is all about Enlist best management practices and frequently asked questions. We're going to start with a high-level recap of the 25 season. Then we'll move into some application updates. We'll pause midway through the hour for any questions that you guys might have. We do have the functionality to collect questions from our listeners today, so please type those in the Q&A function within Zoom, and we'll address them 2 different times today. The second half of our call today will be going over several frequently asked questions that we've collected over the years that we'll share with you. And again, like I mentioned, at the end of the hour, we'll stay on and answer any questions that you have. So we please ask that you be interactive and engage with us and use that Q&A feature for any questions that you might have for the panelists. A special call out, this is worth 1 CEU credit. So whatever email that you have that you registered with, that should be accredited to your account within 45 days. All right, so let's get started with the recap of the 25 season. So first and foremost, like I said, we appreciate you and we thank you for your business and the partnership that you have given us the past several years. When you look at last year's planted acres, the Enlist weed control system, specifically Enlist E3 soybeans, was on over 65% of the US soybean acres. The Enlist soybean trait is the #1 trait in the country. Growers are reaching for that elite germplasm and at the same time wanting to utilize Enlist One or Enlist Duo. Today, Todd and Jeff will cover key features and benefits of these herbicides and the value that they bring to growers. But you can see several of them listed here on your screen. Some of those key features being, the flexibility of the system, the mixability for that programmed approach for multiple modes of action, and definitely the proven track record. We have demonstrated that this is a neighbor-friendly weed control solution. We launched this product responsibly, and we continue to fully test to make sure that we are delivering a product that farmers can have confidence in the weed control that they're receiving. As we continue to look at a few more proof points here, last year we've sprayed more than 150 million acres with the Enlist herbicides over the past 8 years. So if you look at that, that's pretty impressive. For 8 consecutive years, we have gained market shares, both with Enlist soybeans, Enlist corn, Enlist cotton. So growers continue to reach for more bushels, and they're also finding value in the Enlist trait and the germplasm from Corteva. We've reached over 65% penetration, like I mentioned on the last slide, and you're seeing the value of strong weed control with the Enlist system. That is why we see a 75% spray rate with Enlist herbicides over the top of E3 soybeans. That's truly a testament to this technology. We have clear differences in the countryside compared to other products in the industry, specifically when you think of dicamba characteristics. I challenge you guys to take a deep look at the differences between the 2 different technologies. We're confident in the value of the Enlist system and what that brings to you as growers. We have no cutoff dates, there's less restrictions, and overall it's offering you more peace of mind at the end of the day. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Todd, who is going to give you a deeper dive into the Enlist control system and best practices when it comes to application. Todd?
Yep. So we'll start a little bit with just general understanding of what the Enlist system is and just some application guidelines. And then a little bit later, we'll dive into some very, some deep specific topics. But we always talk about the Enlist weed management system as a system. And that's what it is. And what a system, the definition of a system is something that contains multiple pieces, right? So it all starts with the traits. Without these traits, we can't even spray the product, right? So we're starting with these bred traits. Enlist E3 soybeans contains herbicide tolerances to 2,4-D choline, glyphosate, and glufosinate. Enlist corn, launched here recently, contains herbicide tolerances to 2,4-D choline, glyphosate, glufosinate, as well as the FOP herbicides, specifically Assure 2 being the labeled product there. And then Enlist cotton, for those of us down south, contains herbicide tolerances to 2,4-D choline, glyphosate, and glufosinate. So we have to start here with the traits before we can move to the next step. The second piece of the system is the Enlist branded herbicides. Since we came to the market, we've had two different options for our growers. Enlist Duo is the convenient tank mix of 2,4-D choline and glyphosate. And then Enlist One is the straight goods 2,4-D choline. Enlist One is the vast majority of the product utilized today across the market, and you'll continue to see that moving forward. But both of these products, again, contain that choline salt, which we'll talk a little bit more in depth here shortly, but also contain that Colex-D technology, which brings that drift reduction to the table for us there. So even with that, the 2,4-D choline is still the 2,4-D that you're used to in terms of weed control. We bring great value with the choline salt and the Colex-D, but from a weed control standpoint, it's that reliable 2,4-D that we know. Ragweeds, lamb's quarters, mare's tails, palmer, and water hemp. So we're excited with these Enlist branded products of what they bring to the table. And then when we use these Enlist branded products, Enlist One or Enlist Duo, there's a few ideas that we need to keep in mind. And if we hit these main points, we're going to be successful greater than 95% of the time, right? Step one is making sure we're spraying the right size weeds. 2 to 3 inch weeds, you see their max height of 6 inches. Guys, the biggest thing is pull out a ruler and truly see what 2 to 3 inch weeds are, right? That's the biggest thing that we get is, well, I sprayed small weeds. But we also need to spray when the weeds are actively growing, right? So when we're in a drought, when we are, cold scenario right now in a burn down situation, but when we're in a drought in the middle of the summer, those weeds aren't actively growing. So we need to make sure the conditions are such that the weeds are moving for Enlist branded herbicides to work the best way we can. We need to apply full rates. You'll see there on the right, Enlist One herbicides, the full rate there is 2 pints to the acre. We always spray 2 pints. We always spray 2 pints of Enlist One herbicide. Enlist Duo is 4.75 pints to the acre. And again, we always spray 4.75 pints to the acre with Enlist Duo. There's never a reason for us to reduce those rates when we are utilizing Enlist One and Enlist Duo herbicides. Qualified nozzles, they're just like some of the other auxin systems out there. We do have nozzle requirements, but guess what, guys? We've got over 100 qualified nozzles for Enlist One and over 100 qualified nozzles for Enlist Duo. So you most likely have at least one of those set of nozzles on there, but you probably have multiple qualified nozzles at your disposal already on your farm. And then again, making sure we're using that pressure range correctly with those nozzles. And then making sure we've got plenty of water. We always want a minimum of 10 gallons, but you're never going to hear me tell a grower, hey, we want 10 gallons. You're going to hear me say we want 15 gallons, right? So just making sure we have plenty of carrier there. And then those appropriate spray additives, right? Talk to your local territory manager, your local retailer for a better understanding of what each geography needs. But we do have flexibility with the use of these adjuvants. So we need to utilize them the best we can to make sure we're successful. And I mentioned a minute ago about weed height, right? You'll see here on the left, we're looking at ragweed, water hemp, and lamb's quarter in 2 to 4 inches, right? How's Enlist One going to do? Enlist One does absolutely perfect on these weeds at 2 to 4 inches. As we move even into the 5 to 6 inch range, we start to lose control, and then at 10 to 12 inch, we really start to slip a little bit there. Don't look at common ragweed at 10 to 12 inches there, guys. We want 2 to 3. Even though it says we got good control, we want it at 2 to 3. I love this slide here, and I use this slide all the time. And really what it shows is how these auxins work, how 2,4-D works. When you make that application, that plant is moving that active ingredient to those growing points. That's how these auxins work, these plant hormones work. And when you look at that 2-inch weed there, you're seeing 9 growing points. So you're taking that 2 pints that you're spraying on that acre, and you're spreading it out to 9 different places in that plant. And you're getting good efficacy there. 3 to 4 inches, now we've added 5 growing points there that we've diluted that 2,4-D choline salt a little bit more. We continue to go up 18 growing points, guys. Now we've essentially cut that dilution in half in terms of how much active ingredient is getting to each spot in that plant. And then you look at what would be that 6 to 8 inch mark there in that last picture, and there's not even enough, as he says in this picture, not enough fingers and toes to count all the growing points here. So again, the idea is not just focusing on 2-inch height, but here's the understanding of why we say 2 inches, right? Because Palmer and water hemp is really gonna hurt us there as we continue to get taller. We talked about drought a little bit, and how moisture stress can really hurt us there. You'll see in these charts here, looking at do we see drought before? Do we see a drought after? Do we live in a no stress situation? Have we been getting rainfall? So looking at these are quarter X rates. So again, I talked about how we always use 2 pints. We're trying to stress test the system here and really show you guys what drought stress can do. So even at a quarter X rate of 2,4-D in a no stress environment, we've been getting rainfall, we're going to get 80+% control of water hemp. We get that drought stress scenario prior to the application. In other words, that water hemp has shut down. All of a sudden, that weed control drops to less than 50%, both with 2,4-D and glyphosate. These studies were done with susceptible populations. So these are not resistant populations where you would expect only, and we're talking about the glyphosate here, where you would expect that 40% control anyway. These are glyphosate susceptible populations that we did these on. So truly showing the effect of drought stress. So drought stress before, we see a vast reduction in weed control, even drought stress afterwards. We may have good rainfall up to it, but let's say the rain cut off yesterday, we go out there and we spray and it doesn't rain for another week afterwards. We're going to see reduced control there again because that plant begins to slowly shut itself down. So if looking at here, the full rate scenario, you see we always use 32 ounces, always 32 ounces or 2 pints. This is just showing you what the 1 pint rate looks like. Again, I mentioned don't look at ragweed earlier, the weed height thing. Don't look at ragweed and morning glory here at the half rate, because that's not where we need to be living. But look at Palmer, right? When we cut that rate in half, we're dropping to less than 70% control. We look at water hemp, we're dropping less than, almost right there around 75% control at a half rate. So we have to make sure we are keeping that full rate there. And we have to make sure that we have multiple active ingredients in the tank, multiple effective active ingredients in the tank. That's always going to help us, even if we say, hey, glyphosate isn't effective on Palmer in my area. Yes, I would rather you utilize another effective mode of action, but even having glyphosate in the tank, even in some of those tolerant or resistant scenarios, can help, having that extra piece there in the tank. All right, I mentioned the nozzles earlier. Like I said, we do have nozzle requirements, nozzle qualifications, but again, guys, we have over 100 different options. Options that range through different manufacturers, options that range from even greater drift management, or even you'll see there pulse width modulation sprayers. So we've got everything you need to fit your sprayer. but we do need to make sure that we're using one of the nozzles on this list. One of the reasons we have to pay attention to nozzles is coverage, right? Number one is we have to make sure we're getting that drift management. We don't want to use your typical flat fan extended range nozzles that we're going to get a lot of driftable fines, but we still have the option to make sure we're getting good coverage. You look at this is a T-Jet AIXR on the two pictures on the left, and a TTI nozzle there on the right. That would be your typical dicambus nozzle. This is the reason that we want to make sure we're choosing that balance between drift control or drift management and coverage. You look at the 10 gallons per acre with the AIXR, and we're getting 20% coverage. Compared to the TTI, even all the way at 20 gallons per acre, we're still almost getting the same amount of coverage. So the AIXR is giving that drift management, but also giving that acceptable coverage, or really outstanding coverage. When you look at that 20 gallon per acre carrier, 40% coverage, we're going to be successful, or is going to set us up for success very often there. And then deposition aids. When we look at what manufacturers are putting in these formulations, we're oftentimes putting these adjuvants built in, but we still see a benefit from utilizing additional adjuvants. What you're looking at here in all four of these pictures is a different magnification that it takes to show the entire droplet. So if you look at the Enlist herbicide there in the top left corner with no adjuvant, we have to zoom in to a 1500x magnification for both sides of that droplet to touch the top and bottom of the picture. When we add an NIS, we have to zoom out from that 1500 back to the 850 magnification for that droplet to touch the top and bottom. But when we use an MSO or a COC, our magnification is less than half. So what does that mean? That means the droplet is bigger, right? If we're zoomed in less, that means the droplet is bigger. So what you're seeing with the MSO, with the crop oil, is you're seeing that droplet spread out on the leaf. That droplet is covering more leaf surface area, which is giving us a greater opportunity to really get these active ingredients into the leaf. So even though we're building these formulations in, adding these additional adjuvants is still useful. So again, we went through this with that slide earlier, but just to kind of wrap this section up, guys, remember full rates, spray when the weeds are small, use the right nozzles for coverage and drift management, and then keep those water volumes up.
Great. Thanks, Todd. I appreciate that. Just to really sum up 2 focus points here with Enlist brand products. One is all about weed control, right? We want to reduce the competition that's in those fields to maximize your yield potential. And that's what Todd, covered so effectively there. It's, how we spray and ensure that we're hitting those weeds effectively. The second part is spray efficacy and weed resistance management. It's not only about what's in the tank, but how we approach each field is extremely important. We want to make sure that we're using effective modes of action and ensure we're protecting the integrity of the system for as long as possible to really reduce our resistance year over year. So before I pass it over to Jeff, I do want to remind everyone, we do have the Q&A feature that we're going to be asking or answering any questions that the listeners have today. Go ahead and put those questions into the Q&A feature within Zoom, and we'll have 2 different opportunities to be able to address those. So next, I'm going to pass it over to Jeff, who's going to walk it through a few frequently asked questions that we've collected over the years.
Yes, thank you, Julie. It's good to be with you here this morning. And in this next section, we're going to kind of maybe prime the pump for some questions from you, if you've got some that you want to put into that feature. But these are some of the common questions that we get when it comes to using Enlist. And so we'll ask some questions here. We'll give you an answer. This first one, should I use AMS, or what other adjuvants should I use when I'm spraying the Enlist herbicides? Well, let's tackle that AMS question first. The reason we use AMS is because we've got hard water particles that can tend to neutralize some of our herbicide activity. And what happens in the spray tank is uh, molecules like calcium or manganese, when we put that herbicide into the spray tank, they attach to the herbicide, to the active ingredient. And so the herbicide gets tied up and it's not able to do the work that we want it to do. And so when we use AMS, when we use that water conditioner, you can see those red bars come in there, and all of a sudden, the activity that we see changes dramatically. You know, with calcium, for example, the amount of control that's there on lamb's quarter goes from almost 10% up to nearly 90%. And so that AMS makes a huge difference. And so yes, we want AMS in the tank. AMS has been used for years with all sorts of spray mixtures that are out there. It helps glyphosate work better. It really helps glufosinate get its job done as well. And so having AMS in the tank is really important. And you can see down there on the bottom that weight range 8.5 to 17 pounds. You can ask your retailer to help dial in that rate for you a little bit better, but definitely we want to have AMS in the tank. Another question that we've been seeing a lot this year and previous years is about spray quality, the water quality that we're using when we go out and make these applications. Lots of questions around pH and what's the optimal pH to get the best control. I think everybody is aware that, you know, water itself is going to be right around a 7 pH, going to be right there in the middle of that pH scale, going to be neutral. But as we drop that pH, our weed control is going to increase. Some ways that happens, AMS can help reduce the pH of water. And when we do that, we can see some increased control there on the screen. You can see some different weed species there, giant ragweed, horseweed, Palmer amaranth. When that pH level is at 9 or even 6.5, we see a much better result when we get up or we get down to about a 4 pH. So that AMS is going to help reduce that pH. And then some of the herbicides you use will also help reduce that pH. And so by doing the AMS into the tank, kind of that standard process that we ask you, we're probably going to get pretty close to where we want to be with that pH level to get the best control that we can out there. And then you can see again, if you think about the volume or the amount of AMS that you put in the tank, again, we don't have any in that top comparison, and we add some in the bottom there, and you can see the results get better on all 3 weed species there when we have AMS in the tank. So it's very important to have there and encourage you to do that. Todd talked for a few minutes about adjuvants and the importance of adjuvants. And yes, we can add non-ionic surfactant or crop oil or MSO to the Enlist tank mix. We have a lot of people in the area that I work with that started out using non-ionic surfactant. And in the last few years, they've moved to a more aggressive adjuvant. They've jumped up to crop oil or to MSO. When we think about these different adjuvants, you know, non-ionic surfactant really helps reduce some surface tension of that droplet and help it spread out on that leaf. That's really what the non-ionic surfactant is doing. And when we jump up to crop oil or methylated seed oil, what we're seeing is a little better penetration. That MSO and that crop oil is kind of helping chew through that waxy layer on that leaf surface, and therefore that herbicide is getting access to that leaf tissue. And so that's why we're using crop oil or MSO. So sometimes it's dependent upon the tank mix partner that you have. That might dictate what you use. But in general, we can use all 3 of those adjuvants. And then when it comes to tank mixes with Liberty Ultra, when that's part of our tank mix, we need to jump up to a high surfactant oil concentrate or an HS MSO as well. That's part of the requirement when we want to use some Liberty Ultra. So what I would ask you to do is to go to the Enlist Tank Mix website, and you can see all the different tank mix partners that we're approved to be mixed with, and you can also see all of the different spray adjuvants that we can use, and then you can choose the one that you like to use, that you're familiar with. Lots of choices there, and so I'm sure you'll find some that you're very familiar with, but that's where you can go to help get some guidance on what product to choose when you're doing that Enlist tank mix. Todd did a good job of walking through this slide, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it, but you can see when we use Enlist by itself on the upper left-hand quadrant, or we're using non-ionic surfactant or crop oil or MSO, so that droplet is spreading out a little bit more. We're getting better coverage than when we do not use an adjuvant. And then again, as I mentioned, when we use some COC or MSO, we're also going to see a little bit better penetration of that droplet through that waxy cuticle on the leaf surface to get down into the leaf tissue to give us the control that we're looking for. So make sure we're using the appropriate adjuvant when we put our tank mix together. We get questions as well around should I use a drift reduction agent when I spray Enlist? Now, there's other herbicides out there that require that. We do not. With our Colex-D technology, we've done some things in the manufacturing process to help us reduce the amount of driftable fines. And then when we use the correct nozzle, we can have a greater impact on those driftable fines so that we make sure that the herbicide is staying where it belongs. It's not going to get up and move on us. It's not going to go and impact fruit trees or garden or some sensitive crops that may be around your Enlist field. And so what this graph is showing us here is the solid lines are really Enlist product, just the way it is out of the jug. And then the dotted lines show the Enlist product. Now we've added a DRA to it. And the first thing you can see is those dotted lines are lower on the chart than what those solid lines are. That's the impact of that drift reduction agent. What that is doing is reducing the amount of driftable fines, but it's also having an impact on the spray pattern, and it's shrinking it down so we're not getting the overlap that we want. And so when we use Enlist as it's designed right out of the jug there, we don't need to add any extra drift reduction agent. We want to keep that control as high as we can, and we don't see a need for having that drift reduction agent added in with those Enlist tank mixes. And you can see that that's effective, at different PSIs, at different rate ranges that we might use, but we really don't see the need for that to be used with our Enlist tank mix applications that we make. With that, Julie, I'm going to pause for a minute and see if any questions have come in before we continue on. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Jeff. Yes, we do have a few questions. So just a reminder, please type any that you have. We'll have 2 different times for, now and then again at the bottom of the hour. So the first one, Jeff, I think you talk about this a little bit, but what is the best water pH for this product? If you want to hit home on that again.
Yeah, I think on the chart there we went all the way down to about a 4. We see some really good results when our Enlist tank mixes are in that probably 4.5 to 5.5 or so range is kind of ideal. And we can get there by the use of not only the AMS that we add in the tank, but we can also see that when we add other herbicides in the tank, bringing that pH level down. There are other things you can do. You can add some pH modifiers to your tank. I guess the caution I would throw out with that is this is going to be very specific to any tank mix that you put out there. So an Enlist glufosinate one might look different than an Enlist glyphosate one. And when you add in a layered residual like an Inversa or an Ever-Prex, that might have some impact there as well. So if you're going to be testing your water, you've got to be very specific as to what you're testing with all these different tank mixes you might use before you start introducing those pH modifiers in.
Thanks, Jeff. Todd, how about this one? So, we've had varying experiences from year to year with Enlist. Have you seen efficacy fallen off over the years or heard any concerns from any of your growers?
No, I think when we do get phone calls around reduced efficacy, our goal as market development specialists and any employee, of course, have a right, is to truly get to the bottom of it. The world we live in now with herbicide resistance it's a real thing, and with glyphosate, with some of our group 14s, with different things out there. So we want to make sure that we're going to help the growers truly understand what's happening in that field. So if you ever do have an issue or you ever do have a question, I would suggest reaching out to your local market development or your local territory manager, and they can help you get in contact with your market development specialist. And let's walk those fields, because oftentimes when we get a call, we can really start to nail it down to, okay, well, what did we have in the tank? Were we using the correct nozzles? What were the environmental conditions right? There are some situations where, hey, you know what? Everything appears to be in working order. Appears to be just right. And we, just didn't have, good results in a particular field for something we can't put our finger on. And in that situation, Corteva's happy to work with you however we need to. But again, oftentimes we can typically work our way down to what's really going on. So I would say if we ever do have problems, reach out, because that's what we're here for. But overall, no, we haven't, or at least I haven't heard anything about reduced efficacy over the last several years.
Thanks. Okay, maybe Jeff, for you, is there a difference between 2,4-D choline and 2,4-D amine?
Yes and no.
I would say before going too far, and you can answer as much as you want to, but we are going to talk about that in a few slides. We've got a handful of slides that will touch on that. But if you want to go ahead and make a comment, you're welcome to.
I'll just give a preview there. The active ingredient 2,4-D is the same in 2,4-D amine as it is in our 2,4-D choline or our Enlist products. The difference is in the manufacturing of the product, and the things we have done with our Colex-D technology to make sure that the product stays where it belongs and it's not getting up and bothering some of those sensitive areas or sensitive crops like we talked about before. But I'll stop there and let Todd give you the rest of the story when we get to his slides. But that's a good question.
All right, let's maybe do one more here and then we can go on. And I, again, encourage everyone to continue to ask questions through the Q&A. So what are the BMP for spraying Enlist in hot drought-like conditions?
I can try that one, Todd, and if I miss something, you can jump in there. But if we're entering into some high heat, drouthy conditions, there are a few things we can do to help us out. Okay, the rate is the rate, so that 2-pint rate or that 4.75 of Enlist Duo is where we want to be. Make sure we're using the proper adjuvants. Adjuvants become even more important when we get to situations where we have real variable weather conditions, and drought being one of those things. So make sure we're using the right adjuvant at the right rate. And then the water volume, all those things that Todd talked about are really important. If you've been using 10 gallons, which we don't want you to use, we prefer you maybe at 15. Maybe you want to be 15 to 20 in those dry, drouthy conditions. We can spray a little bit earlier in the day before those plants kind of shut down because of the heat and the drought stress. So there are some little tweaks that we can make in those dry, drouthy conditions. And those would be a few examples of that. Todd, I don't know if you have anything else to add in there.
No, I think you hit on it.
Okay.
Great. Thank you, guys. Keep the questions coming in. I think we'll move on here. I believe, Jeff, you're next. You're going to walk us through a few more frequently asked questions that we've received and dive in a little bit more around formulation and application best practices.
You bet. So this first one here, why doesn't Corteva promote or support spraying Enlist One by itself? And Todd talked about this a little bit, I think, before with effective modes of action. We want to make sure that we're attacking weeds with multiple modes of action. If we spray one active ingredient over and over again on a field, we can get ourselves into a spot where we're going to see some misses. We're going to see some resistance develop. This chart on the right-hand side, is just showing several different active ingredients that have been used over the years, very effective products. But when we use them by themselves, they aren't as effective anymore. So as an example, that green line you see there is the ACC ACE active ingredient, so the post grass killers. Spray that all by itself. We can see a little resistance develop over time. You can see a lot of these things work very well through the early decades, from the mid 50s to the 1990, the mid 90s, and then we kind of saw an explosion of some resistance developing out there. That blue line is glyphosate. We know when glyphosate tolerant soybeans and corn came in. A lot of people sprayed glyphosate over and over again. Pretty soon it wasn't as effective because we weren't doing any tank mixing. We weren't doing any other modes of action with it. Another one that we see there is that red line. I believe that's the ALS family. Think of products like Pursuit. And when Pursuit came to the market, and it was very successful to start with and used over and over again, but pretty much sprayed by itself. And pretty soon we started to see some resistance develop there. So we always want to see another effective mode of action mixed in with the Enlist herbicide. Quite often that's glufosinate, sometimes it's glyphosate. Depending upon which crop you're in, there's all sorts of different products we can use. But to go out there with an effective pre-emerge product, first off, to set the stage, and we'd like to see multiple modes of action there as well, and then follow that up with the Enlist tank mix, not Enlist by itself, but an Enlist tank mix that contains multiple modes of action to make sure we're not going to see some resistance develop over time. Todd, I think we're coming to you next on this one here, if I remember right.
Yep. So this was the couple set of slides that I was referencing a second ago when somebody asked about, I believe the question was actually like volatility differences between 2,4-D choline and 2,4-D amine. So we're going to go through these. What are the differences between the salts? So Enlist herbicides you see here written there, like they're not the same as other 2,4-D containing products. The 2,4-D, just like Jeff mentioned, is still 2,4-D. 2,4-D that worked on this weed with an ester formulation is going to work on this weed with a choline formulation. The difference, though, is in the salt and how it's formulated. So if you think of what a salt is, right, it's that positive chemical molecule, whether it be an ester, an amine, or a choline. And choline's not just a word we made up, right? If you go back to your chemistry textbooks from college or high school, a choline is a molecule, a set of atoms that's found all across chemistry, right? The same way an ester or an amine is. But cholex, well, we talk about physical drift there, but let me stick to choline for a second, the salt. The choline, though, is a less volatile salt than an ester, and it's a less volatile salt than an amine. And I believe if we go, let's go to the next slide, because I really want to make sure we're going to do this in a couple different blocks. Go to the next slide, and then we're going to come back. One more. Okay, this is what I wanted to touch on. So we talked about the salts, and we talked a little bit about volatility based on that question earlier. So the reason we say 2,4-D choline is 96% less volatile than an ester or 85% less volatile than an amine is because the 2,4-D acid itself is the piece that volatilizes. It's the same with the dicamba acid itself. The salt itself of the choline, the amine, whatever, that's not what can volatilize and move up into the air. It's the acid itself. For that to happen, the salt has to break apart. With amines, that breaks apart very easily. With esters, that breaks apart even easier. So when that breaks apart and it's sitting either on the soil surface or on the leaf surface, once that acid breaks apart, that 2,4 or that salt breaks apart, that 2,4 acid can volatilize. So that choline is so much more stable that when it's sitting on that leaf surface, that it's not going to break apart. That attraction between that positive molecule and that negatively charged acid, the 2,4-D, is so much stronger that it's going to stay together 96% and 87% more of the time than the ester and the amine. So that's the difference there. And that's the reason that we're so confident in that 2,4-D choline is going to stay where we get it. Notice I didn't say it's going to stay on the field. It's going to stay where we put it. And that goes back to the drift section of these slides. So now, Jeff, if you're, yeah, Julie, thank you. If you'll go back, there we go. So now we'll talk a little bit about drift. So the Colex-D technology is a separate piece than the 2,4-D choline. The Colex-D technology is actually a formulation technology that we're able to work into that jug to essentially be that drift reduction agent in the tank or in the jug, excuse me. So I believe there's actually a question sitting in the Q&A right now about using drift retardants. The reason we don't require that is because we build it in with that ColXD technology. It will effectively increase that particle size enough that we're reducing the amount of driftable fines without having to add anything else in there. So if you look at this study, this was a fairly large study. You see 7.5 acre blocks. They made the application following a label, or in this situation, not following a label, looking for a little bit of wind, and they found no soybean injury on either side. And you can see in that chart there on the right that because of that ColXD technology compared to 2,4-D formulation without it, that they were able to keep that 2,4-D down or get that 2,4-D down even in a little bit of wind. Now, we don't, obviously, we never want to make sure we're spraying outside of that labeled scenario. But again, because of the ColXD technology, we don't necessarily have to add that DRA in there. Adding a DRA does not increase the amount of wind that we can spray in. Just because we add a DRA in there, it does, it can potentially help. It most likely will reduce your coverage by adding a DRA in the tank, but it doesn't make it any safer in terms of, well, we put a DRA, so now we can spray up to 15-mile-an-hour winds instead of 10. We always want to make sure we're spraying in that labeled condition with those low winds. So again, here looking at 2,4-D amines versus Enlist-1s, looking with different nozzles, looking at how far we're going to move. If we look at 2,4-D amine, that obviously doesn't contain that ColXD technology, that drift reductant into jug. When we use that flat fan extended nozzle, again, it's going to have a lot more driftable fines compared to the AIXR. With the 2,4-D amine, we're seeing injured plants all the way up to almost 60 feet away. When we use a lower drift nozzle, I'm not going to say drift reduction specific nozzle, but a lower drift nozzle with the AIXR, we're seeing a reduction there just by changing the nozzle. Still not having a drift reductant, but just by changing the nozzle. So now when we look at Enlist-1 with the ColXD in the tank, we use that flat fan nozzle. We're still getting driftable fines. You can see in that top chart, maybe up to 40 feet. But when we use that proper nozzle, and this is why we have specific qualified nozzles, Enlist-1 with the ColXD technology and a qualified nozzle, that product only moved 20 feet. So we're able to reduce the amount of driftable fines. We're able to reduce the amount of movement that we see there. So it is still vital that we pay attention. We never want to say, hey, we don't have to worry about drift anymore. We chose the right nozzle. We chose, we used the Enlist-1 brand. We still have to pay attention. And I tell people all the time, the cheapest insurance you can buy is a $10 windsock that you put on both sides of the field. So no matter which way your sprayer's pointed, you can see which way the wind's blowing. Because when we're in some of these large fields, in that sprayer cab for 20 or 30 minutes spraying a field, guys, that wind can change. That wind can change. So always making sure we're checking the wind, but making sure we start correctly with the Enlist herbicide and we start with that correct nozzle. So I think we can, yep, we talked that slide already. This is a study done looking at volatility and looking at where we see injury from volatility. The way they set these fields up is they made an application there on those gray blocks you see in those pictures across the left. And then they just measured how far out they were seeing injury in these indicator plants. So this was down in Georgia, high temperatures, high humidity, perfect environment for volatility. When you look at the data on the far right table there, that dark bar is an ester. So we saw injury 60% of those indicator plants with an ester, strictly due to volatility. The amine is a lot less volatile than the ester, but the choline, we never saw injury regardless of the distance from the plot due to volatility. So again, that choline salt, like we talked a little bit about earlier, is just staying associated with that acid so we don't see the volatility like we do with other crops. Let's see. So what differentiates the other 2,4-D formulations? Guys, the biggest thing is, like we talked about, it's a system. Traits, herbicides, and then the Enlist Ahead resources, which is part of what you're sitting on today with these webinars. We put a lot of money into R&D. We put a lot of money into truly understanding what's happening in the field. So remember, the Enlist brand herbicides are the only option, the only legal option for you to use on Enlist-traded crops. And then I believe this one's also mine. Why do we need to worry about rainfall after an Enlist application? And again, we saw that data earlier, right? We don't we don't want to fall into the drought conditions even after the fact, but we also don't necessarily want rainfall right there immediately. If we look at the amount of 2,4-D that's taken up into these weeds over time, you'll see Enlist 1 and Enlist 2, I have a 4-hour rain fast period, and this is kind of where that number comes from. It's not just an arbitrary number. At 2 hours, at 2 hours after the application, you can see that Palmer's taken the least of it up. This is concentration on the leaf surface versus moving into it. So the horseweed's taking it up a lot faster. So it takes every bit of 4 hours to get that into the to get that product in. So we just want to make sure that we have enough time for this product to really get into that leaf. 2,4-D is not a burner. It's not something, hey, just sitting on the leaf is good enough to kill it. We got to get it all the way in. So we just want to make sure we get that 4-hour time frame there afterwards. But let you roll on, Jeff.
All right, I'll take this one, Todd. Can I use my dicamba nozzles when I spray Enlist herbicides? And I will say the quick answer to that is no. We would prefer that you not. We did some things on nozzles a little bit earlier, looking at the different droplet sizes. If you remember that water sensitive paper that Todd was talking about, we want to deliver a droplet size out there that is good for coverage and also good for drift reduction. And so when you look at our charts, you'll see there's a lot of nozzles that you can choose from. The droplet sizes are going to be a little bit smaller than what we use on the dicamba side of the herbicide. We see some different color coding that's here on our charts. Look for the green nozzles is what I would suggest to you. The greens are a good balance between coverage and drift reduction. The ones that are coded yellow there are ones that are more leaning towards drift reduction. But we want to have both. We want to have a good balance there. And so lots of choices. I would steer you towards the ones that are green coded here. And that's what I would suggest that you use. When you take a look at the different droplet sizes, compare those TTIs, those larger droplet sizes, to what we see out of those AIXRs, for example. We go from an ultra coarse droplet or an extremely coarse droplet down to a little bit smaller droplet size to just a coarse size. So we can see that not only through the nozzle selection that we do, but we can also see that through the different pressures that we choose to spray at. And so again, this is some of those fine details that Todd was pointing out a little bit earlier that can help us achieve success out in the field. It's not only about the rate, it's not only about the weed size, but it's about the amount of a carrier that you use. It's choosing the right nozzle, and then it's choosing the right spray pressure. I would encourage you to be up in the upper third of that rate range. That's where we can be very comfortable with good coverage, and the product is still going to stay where it belongs. And so you can always, again, ask your retailer or reach out to your Corteva territory manager for a little more direction there. If we look at those droplet sizes, we think about those extremely coarse droplets versus, a fine or a very fine droplet size. You can see the different size there from 500 microns on an extremely coarse droplet all the way down to 125 microns on a very fine droplet. And there in the middle, that 250 micron size of a medium droplet size. The thing I find interesting about this one is the amount of water, the volume of spray there is the same whether you have one droplet there in the extremely coarse or the very fine. When you gather all those together, that's the same amount of volume as you see in one of those big droplets. Which would you rather have? You'd rather have a whole lot better coverage on that leaf than just one or two drops that are going to be there trying to get the weed control that you're looking for. So balance that out, choose the correct nozzle, and that will help us find some success when we're doing some spraying as well. Whoops, excuse me. I got that one showing up. There we go. So this is, further digging into that question. Can I use my dicamba nozzles? Again, we kind of think the answer is no there. Please note the weed size here, 12 to 16. We don't want you spraying that size, but we're trying to tease out some differences to show you some differences in what can happen, like we did earlier with some rates. Here we're doing it with weed size. So we know these weeds are too big, but we're spraying with a TTI nozzle on the left. That's a big droplet. And we're spraying with an AIXR nozzle in the middle, and that's with glufosinate, both of those. And then on the far right-hand side, it's the glufosinate plus Enlist 1 tank mix with the AIXRs. I just think visually, you can see better control over there on the far right-hand side. And part of that is due to the droplet size that we're using, going from a TTI to an AIXR. And then if you look at that middle one, part of it is going from spraying glufosinate by itself to spraying that tank mix together. And so when we use the right tank mix, the right droplets, that's what's going to help set us up for success there. Todd, I think this one comes back to you.
I tell you what we're going to do, because it's already 8:50 Central Time. I'm going to answer this question, and then we're going to skip the slides. Why
Sounds
bring
good.
Enlist herbicide tolerance to corn, and won't that promote resistance? We brought this to corn for several reasons. One, 2,4-D is currently used in corn. This gives us the ability to be a little more flexible with that 2,4-D, but we don't envision, nor do we push Enlist brand herbicides on every acre of corn. We don't see this as hey, we want Enlist sprayed in every single crop on every single acre, but we do see it's the ability to bring a tool to the table. And by bringing it forward, we also were able to bring forward that FOP tolerance with the corn. So again, a great opportunity for growers to be a little more flexible if they need the 2,4-D, 2,4-D choline use there. But again, not something that we anticipate and or envision seeing on a vast number of acres. So we can go ahead and scroll through the rest of these corn. And then glufosinate. One of the things we talked about a few times, why is glufosinate not working on weeds with or without Enlist 1 herbicide? There was a great study done, or really a summary of studies done, that really broke down glufosinate use and when it does and when it doesn't work. You can, everybody's aware we need high humidity, we need good sun. But really, it's not just, hey, we need some sun or we need humidity. It's, there's specific data that they put with this. And the number that they put out there is 75% of the time when we have poor sun conditions, we're going to see a failure. 75% of the time when we see less than 70% humidity, we're going to see a failure with glufosinate. Glufosinate works by moving ammonia and glufosinate active ingredient into that cell. And when we don't have those really good growing conditions to really pump that active ingredient and that ammonia into the plant cell, we're not going to get good control. That being said, Enlist is going to work in some of these other conditions. Glufosinate is going to help Enlist work when Enlist isn't at its best, depending on weather conditions. So the two of these together, we see time and time again our best results. We see glufosinate and Enlist work together better than Enlist and glyphosate. We see Enlist and glufosinate work better together than Enlist 1 by itself. We see Enlist and glufosinate work better than glufosinate by itself. So we always recommend them together. Again, we need to make sure we get our volumes up when we're using glufosinate. We need to make sure we have AMS in the tank. Don't forget, glufosinate, the entire active ingredient name is glufosinate ammonium. And by adding AMS, we're adding more ammonia to the system, which is helping pump that glufosinate into that leaf cell. So AMS is definitely needed there. So again, volumes up, AMS with glufosinate, and Keep putting them together, because I promise you, you're going to be a lot more successful when they're together than when they're apart.
All right. Thanks, Todd and Jeff. Why don't we answer a few questions that have come in, because we are here at the bottom of the hour. I know this is a little bit, what we didn't touch today, but is there a herbicide with 2,4-D choline that is available for non-enlist crops such as grain sorghum or fallow?
We do sell in our range and pasture business a modified 2,4-D called Freelex. I would have to look at the label there to see exactly um, what the label allows as far as spraying that. I know it's in our range and pasture business, but I don't know that we have it on the crop side of the business. I think it's just a range and pasture piece.
Yeah. And so there are, like Jeff mentioned, there's 3 different brands that offer the 2,4-D choline. There's the Freelex, there's Embed Extra, which is used in specialty crops, and the Enlist branded herbicides. The one thing to keep in mind with the Enlist branded herbicides is they do have, or on Enlist One, there is a label for a burn down application. There is a label for, I'm not 100% sure about grain sorghum being on the label, but non-Enlist corn is on the label. So the Enlist herbicides doesn't just have a label for Enlist-traited crops. It does have similar labels to some of your esters, some of your amines for those historically utilized crops where we use 2,4-D, like non-enlist corn and in a burn down. So you can use it there. It is on the label. I'm not 100% sure about grain sorghum just because I don't have a lot in my area, but check the label, and if it's on a typical 2,4-D label, it's probably there.
Okay. Another question just on, what are best practices to preserve this mode of action over the next, several years? There's been some research from universities that have found that Enlist One might not be as effective on water hemp. Do you have any comments there or talking points there?
Water hemp is a big problem in the area that I cover. I think it's a big problem in a number of spots across the Midwest. What I would say is, to take those best management practices a little bit further, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier as well, starts with the pre-emerge program. Use a strong pre. That'll help set us up for success. And then the best management practices really do come into play after that. Make sure we're using the right rate, the right volume of water, and we're hitting it at that 2 to 3 inch size. If we let water hemp get much size to it, it grows very quickly. And it quickly goes from a 2 to 3 inch weed to a 6 to 8 to a 10+ inch weed, which makes control very difficult. So that size is important. The other thing we find is that tank mixture between glufosinate and Enlist One has been our best mix that we can come up with. And to make that even better, I would suggest throwing in then one of our layered residuals. We have a couple of them. Inversa is new to the market this year. Ever-Prex, some of you might be familiar with that. So now we're putting that layered residual out to keep that water hemp from coming back up, because it germinates over a long period of time. And so we got to hit it with a pre, we got to hit it with a post, and then we need to maybe have that layered residual out there to finish off the season.
Okay. This next one is, what is the rate recommendation if you're using Enlist One with Liberty Ultra?
Todd, I don't know if you have much experience with Liberty Ultra down your way, but it's going to be the 2 pints of Enlist, right? And then the Liberty Ultra rate, I believe, drops down to 24 ounces per acre. Is that correct?
That's correct. So regardless of whether you're using generic glufosinate, branded Liberty, or branded Liberty Ultra, the Enlist rate never changes. It's always 2 pints, always 32 ounces, always a quart, whatever you want to call it. We always use that full rate.
All right, that is our last question from the audience. I just want to take a moment here to thank both Jeff and Todd for today, for being our experts on Enlist, but also you guys for joining us this morning. We wish you a very successful season. I know that's going to be starting here real quick with this warmer weather, but thank you again for joining us today. Anything else, Jeff or Todd?
Well, appreciate everyone attending. I hope you have a safe and successful season.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you for jumping on. We appreciate it.